I'm here outside of the Hennepin County Government Center. I'm on my way into the courtroom. Actually, I'll be one of just two journalists inside the courtroom today for the sentencing of Derek Chauvin. I got the call earlier this week that I would be in the courtroom taking notes, not just for you guys, but for local media, national media, and international media. And so there's a lot of pressure on me today, but you guys, I'm proud. I'm proud to be on the right side of history. So before we switch over to coverage of inside the courtroom, I wanted to let you know what you can expect from today's hearing. Today, we know that Judge Cahill is going to consider 5 aggregating factors when he sentences Derek Chauvin. He's going to consider the fact that children were present during this crime. He's going to consider the fact that Derek Chauvin had accomplices. And he's also going to consider the duration in which excessive force was used. On top of that, Attorney General Keith Ellison opened up a link on his website for the community to submit victim impact statements. Within, I think, about an hour, that site crashed because there was such an outpouring of response. More than 1,000 submissions were made, and those will be delivered to the judge to consider in the sentencing as well. Now, many people asking, will we hear from Chauvin today? That's the big question. He does have the legal right to speak today, and usually defendants will use today their right to express any remorse. And oftentimes that can help reduce their sentencing. But legal analysis said that it's very unlikely we'll hear from Chauvin. So we'll have to see on that one there. Now, before I head into the courtroom, just want to give you the heads up that there are rallies planned today around 4 or 5 Central Time that I'll be covering as well. And then there's an evening protest at 9 p.m. that I'll bring to you guys live as well. But for now, I'm going to head into the courtroom, and I hope you guys stick around as we switch over to live coverage inside the courtroom here in just a moment.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. We're going to be going to the courtroom shortly as soon as the feed opens and there's activity in the courtroom. Until then, we're going to show some of the interview that Georgia Ford did with with the prosecutor, Blackwell, following the trial of Derek Chauvin. So bear with just a moment and we will bring that to you in the meantime.
That the force that Mr. Chauvin was using was lethal force.
Attorney Jerry Blackwell was one of the lead prosecutors who helped convict Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd.
Always had this kind of overarching concern that we could lose because we're trying to convict a police officer.
Blackwell says that's not the only reason he had doubts. Was it hard for you?
It was hard in a lot of ways. I mean, I never had a criminal case in my life. So the idea that I wouldn't just be in a criminal case, but it's a case that's the most watched trial in the history of planet Earth.
3 weeks into the trial, another man is killed by police. What went through your mind when you heard about Daunte Wright?
There's still much work yet to do. I understand the Daunte Wright case is a completely different case, but there's no question in my mind that once we received a verdict in the Chauvin trial, it would not be the end of the issues or challenges with either policing or race in America.
The Dante Wright case was recently reassigned to Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who originally appointed Blackwell for the Chauvin trial, leaving many wondering if the two would be working together again to pursue justice for Dante Wright.
I'm not as currently involved in the Dante Wright case. And
if you are asked to be, would you help prosecute in that case too?
I don't know. I would have to wait and to hear. Obviously, I took on, was involved in the Chauvin trial on a pro bono basis, and I would presume that would be the basis that I might, if involved in Dante Wright, it would be the same. And you kind of reach a point where you're pro bono to the point you're out of business. So I've got to stay in business before I can do pro bono for the public good. I need to first do what I need to for my own good first. And I've taken a year off already. I haven't discussed it with him. I haven't been asked by the Attorney General to be involved. So I don't know, but I don't have any plans right now to be involved in the Dante Wright case.
The Derek Chauvin trial is just one case, and there's a bigger issue here. How do we solve it? Where do we go from here?
At the end of the day, the only lasting transformation
all the time, and that's kind of it.
Yeah. Well, when you ask about him, what are you asking about?
Well, I was asking, how did my dad get hurt?
Do you wish that he was still here with us?
Yeah, but he is.
Through his spirit?
Yes.
Yes. And when you see your daddy again one day, what do you want to do when you see him?
I want to play with him.
What kind of games do you want to play with him?
I want to play with him, have fun, go on a plane ride, and that's it.
Yeah.
We used to have dinner meals every single night before we went to bed. My daddy always used to help me brush my teeth.
Oh. Do you miss him helping brush your teeth?
Yes.
How do you hope that the world remembers him?
Well, they helped him because those mean people did something to him.
Yeah. If you could say anything to your daddy right now, what would it be?
It would be, I miss you and I love you.
All right. Thank you, Gianna. I really appreciate you answering questions today.
That was Gianna Floyd. Your Honor, next we'll hear from the nephew of George Floyd, Brandon Williams. Mr. Williams.
In this country is only.
Your names. Brandon Williams, BRANDON WILLIAMS.
You
may proceed. On Monday, May 25th, 2020, George Perry Floyd Jr. was murdered by Derek Chauvin in a malicious and insidious display of hate and abuse of power. Chauvin killed George. Not only did he kill George, but he also displayed a total lack of consideration for human life as he did so. You saw it, I saw it, and millions of people across this country and the globe witnessed the act of hate. A year and 1 month later, I stand here before you tasked with the duty of expressing how George's death has impacted me personally and the rest of our family. As I racked my brain and thought about what I could say today, I came to this conclusion. It is humanly impossible for me to stand here and convey or articulate the right words that would capture all that we are feeling and what we have felt over this period. So please bear with me as I attempt the impossible. The sudden murder of George has forever traumatized us. You may see us cry, but the full extent of our pain and trauma will never be seen with the naked eye. The heartbreak and hurt goes far beyond any number of tears we could ever cry. Words simply cannot express the pain, anguish, and suffering that our family and friends have endured since George's murder. It has been truly unimaginable, but not as nearly unimaginable as the defendant's decision to take the life of a human being with no regard for the effect it may have on others. Although Chauvin will be sentenced today and spend time in prison, he will have the luxury of seeing his family again, talking to them, and he will likely get to spend time with them upon his release. These are all luxuries that my young cousin Gianna was robbed of when Chauvin made the active decision to kill our father. There will be no more birthday parties, no graduations, holiday gatherings, or other family celebrations. The laughter, hugs, guidance, advice, sense of security, and those opportunities to simply say I love you are forever gone. They say time heals all, and while I generally believe that saying, it's challenging to do so given these unfathomable set of circumstances. Before I conclude, I must highlight a few things. George's murder, this trial, and everything in between has been tragic and devastating. Our family is forever broken, and one thing we cannot get back is George Floyd. It is the request of my family that the maximum penalty for the crime for which the defendant was convicted be imposed. On behalf of my family, friends, community, and supporters, I wish to express my sincerest gratitude for allowing us opportunities of expression. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, just for the record, this wonderful lady standing here is a Hennepin County victim advocate.
Ms. Boswell is well known to the court.
Yes, thank you, Judge.
And so, Your Honor, we'll next hear from the brother of George Floyd, Mr. Terrence Floyd.
And Mr. Floyd, if you could state your full name, spelling each of your names.
Yes. Terrence Floyd. That's Terrence, Floyd, Floyd.
Go ahead.
I'm here representing my brother. I'm from New York. On May 25th, 2020, my brother was murdered, everyone knows, by Derek Chauvin. The facts of this case were proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and 3 guilty verdicts have been rendered. This situation has really affected me and my family. Any family member that has went through this, we are part of a fraternity of families, and it's not one of those, fraternities that you enjoy. I just, over this last year and months, I actually talked to a few people, and I wanted to know from the man himself, why? What were you thinking? What was going through your head when you had your knee on my brother's neck? Why when you knew that he posed no threat anymore, he was handcuffed Why you didn't at least get up? Why you stayed there? A month before my brother was murdered, I was on the phone with him, and we had a long conversation. And as I looked at the video of my niece, the last conversation me and my brother had was he wanted to have play dates. He wanted to plan play dates with Gianna and my daughter. And we started setting it up. That can't happen. And I have to, my daughter's still young, but I still have to explain to her because this is history. This is a case everybody knows about. So she's gonna find out, and I'm gonna have to explain that to her. And I think that's, to me, harder than even just standing here, that I have to talk to my daughter and tell her, you know, about her niece, about her uncle, about the situation. That's basically reliving it all over again, years down the line. I'm here on behalf of my family, on behalf of me and my family, we seek the maximum penalty. We don't want to see no more slaps on the wrist. We've been through that already. In my community, in my culture, we've been through that already. Smacked on the wrist. No. Because if it was us, if the roles was reversed, there wouldn't be no case. It would have been open and shut. We'd have been under the jail for murdering somebody. So we asked for that same penalty for Derek Chauvin. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, the final victim impact statement for the state will come from George Floyd's brother, Phalonis Floyd.
And sir, if you could begin by giving us your full name and spell each of your names, and I have permitted you to use your phone because you have notes on it. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And you may proceed when you're ready. Giving us your full name first.
Phalonis Floyd, spelled Philonise, last name Floyd, Floyd.
And you may proceed.
One year ago, May 25th, my brother George was murdered by Derek Chauvin and his co-defendants in broad daylight with a knee to his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. I was a trucker, and immediately my life changed forever. I began to speak to the world for George from the United Nations, Africa, Canada, Japan, and so many other countries. Every day, I have begged for justice to be served, reliving the execution of George, while others begged and pleaded for Officer Chauvin to simply just allow George to take a breath. I haven't had a real night's sleep because of the nightmares I constantly have hearing my brother beg and plead for his life over and over again. Even saying, they're going to kill me. Please, officer. Screaming for our mom. I have had to sit through each day of Officer Derek Chauvin's trial and watched the video of George dying for hours over and over again. For an entire year, I had to relive George being tortured to death every hour of the day, only taking naps and not knowing what a good night's sleep is anymore. I've been lifting my voice tirelessly every day so that George's death will not be in vain. Honorable Judge Peter K. Hill, I thank you for allowing me to share this today. George's life mattered. So my family and I, most of all, my niece, Gianna. My niece, Gianna, she needs closure. I'm asking that you please find it suitable to give Officer Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, charge that he has been found guilty for. My family and I have been given a life sentence. We will never be able to get George back. Daddy's our daughter's first love. He would never be able to walk Gianna down the aisle at her wedding, attend those magical moments of her life like a daddy-daughter dance, sweet 16 party, seeing her out for prom graduations, and she would never be able to have any personal memories with her father. With a smirk on his face and children present, Officer Chauvin used excessive force and acted against his training. Chauvin had no regards for human life, George's life. I stand before you today asking you to please help us find closure by giving Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, making sure he does his time consecutively without the possibilities of parole, probation, or getting out early for good behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. Here today, of course, for sentencing, gives us an opportunity to speak about other matters that I think are involved in sentencing and where we are in the criminal justice system in the processing of this case. As a member of an elected office representing the people of the state of Minnesota, as well as people of the local community, I want to say a couple of things. And first of all, I want to really thank some of the police officers at the Minneapolis Police Department who, under great pressure, great stress, and to some extent at peril to their occupations, what they've devoted their life to, stuck to their oath and their commitment as police officers to speak openly and honestly about policing and the training that is given and received by police officers. Those officers didn't hide behind a blue wall. They came forward, they told this court and those jurors what they knew about training and responsibility. And I think they deserve recognition and credit for that. Would also like to thank members of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. Those agents get called in, great sacrifice to their personal lives. Whenever things happen, they go. They did that here, and under really extraordinary circumstances, completed a very professional and thorough investigation. Conducting interviews is hard enough, but conducting them in the atmosphere of the city following the murder of George Floyd was even more difficult. And they did so, I think, above and beyond the call of duty. And I want to thank them for doing that on behalf of the whole prosecution staff. Your Honor, I want to thank the family, the loved ones, the friends of George Floyd. They have been through so much more than families involved in murder cases. He's right. It's a fraternity you don't want to be part of. But they've been through so much more because of the pandemic and because of security, safety precautions that we've had to take. They have been through a lot. At a time when they try to grieve, like everybody does for the loss of someone, they are going through so much more. And I want to thank them, all of them, the family. The court saw a testimony from Philonise Floyd, Courtney Ross. These are people who are trying to deal with their loss, but they have to do it in a very public way and under very trying circumstances through no fault of their own. So I thank them. They have all been models of grace and understanding. And it's really remarkable, quite frankly. I'll, I think, come back to them again in a little bit. Your Honor, we have submitted a sentencing brief. I would incorporate that. I guess I would incorporate my comments today into that memo. But I do think there are things that I want to bring out today in my arguments. For hundreds of years, the court had discretion in sentencing. It was the trial court's decision on what a sentence should be. The recognition that the trial court sat through the trial, watched the evidence, and saw how it affected people, informed the court's discretion. When the legislature passed the guidelines, in a legitimate attempt to try and even out sentences, they defined certain presumptive sentences, as we all know, for typical crimes. For each crime, the typical crime. But they did not remove discretion for sentencing judges. They recognized that nobody is better suited to decide whether this is the typical case represented by that guideline's presumptive sentence, or if there are reasons why this is worse than that. And the guideline still gives this court discretion when there are aggravating factors to give a more serious sentence than what the guidelines
convicted for the murder of George Floyd.
And as you know, we are asking you to do that today. As this court found, there are 4 aggravating factors that we have identified. They go beyond a list of just what those factors are. We have not just done our homework and found a list. The court made good findings, detailed findings about those factors, and we think they justify a greatly increased sentence. This is not the typical second-degree unintentional murder. Supreme Court in our state has said that, very recently, even one aggravating factor is sufficient to go twice the top of the range. Here we have 4. The first one that the court found is an abusive position of trust and authority. And the court specifically found that when Mr. Chauvin was acting as a police officer, he had a position of trust and authority. That is certainly true. We trust police officers. We trust them when we need help. We call them for help. We trust that they're going to take care of the problems that they are assigned to deal with, right? We trust them. We also give them great authority. We give them great power. We give them power to use force that individuals would be prosecuted for using, right? We give them authority to arrest, to detain. And with great power, of course, comes great responsibility. So they're not sent out there by themselves to do this. They're given substantial training. This court saw all of that through the trial in general and in specific to Mr. Chauvin and the other 3 officers. They're given training on the use of force, the proportional use of force. The force used has to be warranted by the threat. They're given training on de-escalation because we recognize that police officers are called in when people are not having their best day, when people might be affected by mental illness, drug abuse, any number of issues. They're just having a bad day, and they're trained for that and should be. And they're taught how to use that to de-escalate and control a situation. They're taught medical intervention. They're taught to provide medical attention to people who need it. Being a police officer is a difficult job. We ask a lot of them. It's a profession, there's no doubt about it. But we give them a substantial amount of training, and most officers do it right. This case wasn't about police officers, all police officers. It wasn't about policing. This case was about Derek Chauvin disregarding all that training he received and assaulting Mr. Floyd until he suffocated to death. One of the things that you heard, Your Honor, and the jurors heard that can really encapsulate, I think, a very important issue here. 7 words: in your custody is in your care. And it's a real simple mantra. It's a real easy thing to remember. You're going to take custody of somebody, you have to provide care. You have to do it in a caring way. You can't simply disregard their care. Mr. Chauvin abused his position of trust and authority as a police officer by doing just that, just disregarding all his training. It was an abuse of that because what did he decide to do? We often are forced in this, criminal justice system to infer people's state of mind by their conduct and their statements. What was Derek Chauvin's endgame here? What was the plan? Seems apparent the plan was hold him down until we can dump him in an ambulance and no longer have him be our problem. Recall he said to Charles McMillan, "He's a big guy, might be on something." That's it. He held Mr. Floyd down as Mr. Floyd begged for his life. He had the other officers help in that regard. And rather than doing the simple expedient of putting him on his side, he said, yeah, He was dismissive to that duty of care. We trust that arrestees will be treated with respect, reasonable force, and that their medical needs will be addressed. I'm paraphrasing from the court's findings. That trust was violated. We trust that they will use their authority reasonably. And this was a particularly egregious abuse of that force. Again, paraphrasing the court's findings. The typical second-degree murder does not involve that extent of abuse of a dearly held position of abuse or a position of authority and trust by the community, by individuals of the community. Your Honor found that Mr. Floyd was treated by Mr. Chauvin with particular cruelty. I think tortured is the right word. We know that, we've all seen it. Mr. Floyd did not want to be in the back seat. That's it. That's the rub. It was the need to get him in that back seat no matter what. And we all saw that once he was pulled out of that back seat, he calmed right down, even willingly went down to the ground. I'm going down, he said. And he went down to the ground, not fighting, not punching. And he was placed initially on his side. He's already handcuffed. He's placed on his side in the recovery position, like he should be, because he's trying to breathe. And then quickly placed prone on the ground, face down. Mr. Chauvin put his left knee on George Floyd's neck, his right knee on George Floyd's back, face down on the pavement. Had Officer King sit on Mr. Floyd's waist area and had Officer Lane hold his feet down. You can even see Mr. Floyd trying to pull his feet up. We all are going to fight to breathe. Everybody knows that fear when you all of a sudden realize you're having trouble breathing. It's just innate, right? We want to survive. We know we have to breathe. And there's an automatic reaction when you begin to feel like that is threatened. And you can see Mr. Floyd going through that. He tries to pull his feet up, but he's held down by these three officers while Officer Tao is looking on. Later, of course, goes to keep the people who want to help away. He's placed face down on this pavement so harshly that it rubs the skin off his face. He has injuries to his face from being face down on that pavement. He has injuries to his knuckles from just trying to lift himself up. And he's telling Officer Chauvin, I can't breathe. I'm dying. And Mr. Chauvin's response was, And all this time, I mean, imagine what Mr. Floyd is going through. If we're going to talk about particular cruelty and torture, really try to appreciate what he's going through. He knows he's suffocating. We all know that feeling of not being able to breathe enough. And he's begging, he's pleading, and he's being ignored. His concerns are being dismissed by somebody who has taken custody but not care. He was kept in that prone position for 9.5 minutes and was suffocated. There's no other way to say it. That's particularly cruel. That is more cruel than a typical second-degree unintentional murder. Significantly more. This is not a momentary gunshot, punch to the face. This is 9.5 minutes of cruelty to a man who was helpless and just begging for his life. This court found that there were children present, standing only a few feet from these officers. These children, who were ages 17 and one child age 9. Why is that an aggravating factor? Well, I think everybody can figure that out. Right? It's particularly bad to commit a crime in front of children. We've heard a lot of academia about the development of the young brain and how long it can take. And here you got a couple of teenage girls, a 9-year-old girl. How are they going to process this? Standing feet from a man being suffocated by police officers. Such a stark sight that one of the children even says, we got to call the police on the police. How do you process that as a 9-year-old? The children were not only present watching a man die. We've all seen, if you haven't, you really need to. Look at George Floyd's face. As he's dying, he's suffering. The children have to watch this. But not only that, police officers, and there are people around them wanting to help. And at one point, and sure, they got upset. And at one point, Mr. Chauvin points his mace, grabs his mace to keep him back. How does a child look at that? There's another officer screaming at them to get back. The typical second-degree unintentional murder doesn't involve children standing feet away, watching a 9.5-minute suffocation of a man begging for his life. This court also made a finding that the defendant committed the offense with the involvement of 3 or more other persons. Lane and King were involved directly in the restraint, and that Tao kept the bystanders at bay. I've already talked a little bit about Lane and King's role in holding Mr. Floyd down. They recognized that he was pulseless, that Mr. Floyd was pulseless at one point, and yet really made no effort to take care of the person in their custody. Officer Tao watched most of the suffocation and then only went over to keep people from giving help. One person who is identified as a medical trained firefighter for the city of Minneapolis, and that was dismissed. Like, are we going to believe her? So they kept trained medical people from providing help. These were all uniformed peace officers, adding to that abuse of trust and authority. Your Honor, I know the defense has asked the court for probation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time arguing that. It's so outside of the realm of, I think, real possibility. This is a murder. I understand some of the arguments made on behalf of Mr. Chauvin. I understand, well, no, I can't understand what his family members and friends are going through. I can't. But it's certainly not enough for a departure to probation for a second-degree murder. We believe, Your Honor, that these 4 aggravating factors and the findings that the court has made certainly justify an upward departure because there are 4 of them, not standing alone, but in a sense, not overlapping, but coming together to show this is not the typical second-degree murder. This is egregious. And this justifies a double upward departure. From the top of the box, which is 180 months, we're asking the court to do a double departure, recognizing all 4 factors, to 360 months. As I mentioned before, Your Honor, this is sentencing. This is the time for victims, right? This is the time for the loved ones of the victim and the community to have a say. Again, I commend this family. I commend all of the loved ones, the friends, the people that have been involved in this case for tolerating and being gracious. None of this, of course, can bring George Floyd back. That's very true. But this is the time for our criminal justice system to say, we hear you. This is the time for their criminal justice system to say, we recognize that this harm you're going through is real. And while we can't feel what you're feeling, we know we can do what your criminal justice system should do and recognize the severity of this crime and reflect that in the sentence to be given. It's time for this criminal justice system to say, we recognize this is more serious than the typical second-degree unintentional murder. The 4 reasons the court found reflect that and give this court more than an adequate basis to do that. Your Honor, we ask the court to impose a sentence of 360 months, commitment to the Commissioner of Corrections. As you know, Your Honor, there are no fines in murder cases. And we would ask the court just to reserve the issue of restitution. We can clarify that with the family and present that to the court for 30 days. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further from the state?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Nelson. Okay. I'm sorry. Mr. Blackwell?
I'm sorry, I just thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, the defendant's mother, Carolyn Palenti, would like to address the court.
If you could state your full name, spelling each of your names, and proceed when you're ready.
Carolyn, Carolyn, Palenti, Pawlenty. I am the mother of Derek Chauvin. I am here to speak on behalf of my entire family. On November 25th, 2020, not only did Derek's life change forever, but so did mine and my family's. Derek devoted 19 years of his life to the Minneapolis Police Department. It has been difficult for me to hear and read what the media, public, and prosecution team believe Derek to be an aggressive, heartless, and uncaring person. I can tell you that is far from the truth. My son's identity has also been reduced to that as a racist. I want this court to know that none of these things are true and that my son is a good man. Derek always dedicated his life and time to the police department. Even on his days off, he would call in to see if they needed help. Derek is a quiet, thoughtful, honorable, and selfless man. He has a big heart, and he always has put others before his own. The public will never know the loving and caring man he is, but his family does. Even though I have not spoken publicly, I have always supported him 100% and always will. Derek has played over and over in his head the events of that day. I've seen the toll it has taken on him. I believe a lengthy sentence will not serve Derek well. When you sentence my son, you will also be sentencing me. I will not be able to see Derek, talk to him on the phone, or give him our special hug. Plus the fact that when he is released, his father and I most likely will not be here. Derek, my happiest moment is when I gave birth to you. And my second is when I was honored to pin your police badge on you. I remember you whispering to me, "Don't stick me with it." Derek, I want you to know I have always believed in your innocence, and I will never waver from that. I have read numerous letters from people around the world that also believe in your innocence. No matter where you go, where you are, I will always be there to visit you. I promise you I will stay strong, as we talked about, and I want you to do the same for me. I will do what you told me to do, take care of myself, so I will be here for you when you come home. Remember, there is no stronger bond or love than a mother's love. One final thought I want you to remember. Remember, you are my favorite son. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. It is my intent that my remarks this afternoon be quite brief. I do not intend to relitigate the facts of this case, nor spend any substantial time looking at the law. The court is very familiar with the facts of this case, and the parties have fully briefed the court relevant to the sentencing factors. And we recognize that in any case, any sentencing that comes before the court is tasked with a difficult job. The The court must craft a sentence that serves the interests of justice, a rather nebulous term. The court must take into consideration the victim impact, public interest, as well as the circumstances and the history of the defendant. And in this case, more than any other that likely any of us have ever been involved in, that task is exceedingly more difficult. In my remarks today, I just wish to briefly address each of those three considerations, starting with the public impact. As I believe we are all cognizant of, this case is at the epicenter of a cultural and political divide. We tried to keep a lot of that out of the courtroom during the trial and make this case about the facts. But we recognize what has happened as a result of this case. There are a great number of people who will view any sentence you pronounce as overly lenient and insufficient to satisfy justice. But there are an equal number of people who will view any sentence you pronounce as draconian or overbearing. Either way, some percentage of the public will view your sentence as a miscarriage of justice. The intensity of the public interest in this case cannot be understated. I trust that the volume of correspondence that each of us has received from the public at large is indicative of these very sentiments on both sides. As I was informed just yesterday, the Attorney General's office established a website, web submission, to accept community impact statements. Again, in my understanding is in a little over 2 weeks, they received over 1,000 submissions. Again, on both sides. By my very best estimate, since my representation of Mr. Chauvin began last summer, I would estimate that I have received over 5,000 emails, over 1,000 voicemails, and hundreds of handwritten letters. Again, from both sides. And I expect that Your Honor has likewise been inundated with public comment and scrutiny. The impact that this case has had on this community is profound. It goes far beyond what happened on May 25th of last year. It has been at the forefront of our national consciousness, and it has weaved its way into nearly every facet of our lives, from the entertainment that we consume to the presidential politics, from protests to conspiracy theories. In the end, it is my sincere hope that when this proverbial dust settles, the community impact brings forth principled debate and civil public discourse, and ultimately leaves a positive effect on the city of Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota, and the United States. But nevertheless, while this court may consider the community impact, it is for these very same reasons that the court must turn to the foundational legal principles and remember that justice is blind. Law is built on reason and common sense, and it cannot be permitted to be assailed by public opinion. Turning to the second consideration, which is the victim impact, the death of George Floyd. The death of George Floyd was tragic. He is loved by his family members. He is loved by his friends. And his death is justifiably mourned by those whose lives he impacted. He is a son, a brother, a father, an uncle, and a friend to many. And as the court heard today, the impact and the loss of his life, simply just, it can't be simplified. And it will take time. Finally, Your Honor, the court must take into consideration just like it has to take into consideration the aggravating factors, it needs to take into consideration the mitigating factors. And the mitigating factors as set forth by the sentencing guidelines really point to the TROG analysis, essentially, ultimately in this case. We're not going to spend a lot of time, again, arguing for a probationary sentence. That's briefed. But that being said, when we look at the TROG factors, who is Derek Chauvin? Derek Chauvin spent 19 years as a Minneapolis police officer. He loved being a police officer. I was contacted during the course of my representation and have had numerous conversations with his fellow police officers or fellow police officers that worked with Derek, some retired, some still active. And they told me that he was a solid police officer, that he did his job, that if somebody asked him to do a particular task, he never complained, he did it. One person told me that one of his sergeants told me that if I had asked him to dig a ditch for 8 hours, he would have picked up a shovel and he would have never complained for a second. He would have done his job. He was decorated as a police officer, multiple life-saving awards. He was decorated for valor. He was proud to be a police officer because what he liked to do was help people. And as the statistics show, the vast majority of police work is helping people. He was proud to be a Minneapolis police officer. He served his country as the United States in the United States Army. And he too is a son, and a brother, and a father, and a friend. He too, his life, the life he's lived, he's not coming into this as a career criminal with 6 points, 5 points, 4 points. He's coming into this never having violated the law because he lived an honorable life and he attempted to live an honorable life. Derek Chauvin was not even scheduled to work on May 25th, 2020. He volunteered because there was short staffing at the time. I know from numerous conversations that I've had with Derek that his brain is littered with what ifs. What if I just had not agreed to go in that day? What if things had gone differently? What if I never responded to that call? What if, what if, what if? The truth of the matter is, and the end result is that we are here after a jury verdict, finding him guilty of these offenses. And the court's consideration should not only be focused on the aggravating factors, but the mitigating factors as well. The Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission was established for a reason. And yes, the court in circumstances like these has discretion to go beyond and aggravate a sentence beyond the presumptive sentences established by the sentencing guidelines. But the sentencing guidelines don't differentiate between second-degree murders. Someone robs a liquor store, a police officer is involved in an incident, and a person dies in police custody. The law presumes, the legislature presumes that the sentencing guidelines, the Guidelines Commission was established sufficient penalty for all of the second-degree murder categories or cases you would see. From 2019 back to 2010, a total of 90 people were sentenced for second-degree murder. Those sentences, those people, there were more than that, but people who had a 0 criminal history score, more than 90 people were sentenced. 67%, or 60 of those 90 people, received a guideline sentence of 150 months. So 2/3 of all people in this same position received a guideline sentence. 20% received an aggravated sentence, 18 of the 90, and 12 13% or 12 individuals were granted mitigated departures. So if the legislature and the intent of the sentencing guidelines is to eliminate sentencing disparity, the law should presume that the guideline sentence is what is appropriate in this case. Judge may take into consideration at this point those aggravating factors, but you have to counterbalance them, which is the goal of the law, with the mitigating factors. I know that this has been an incredibly difficult case for the Floyd family to have to endure. The state of Minnesota, likewise, prosecutors in this case have endured quite a bit, as has Mr. Chauvin's family. This is a case that has changed the world to some degree, and I hope it's positive. But it's my hope that the court follows the sentencing guidelines, applies the law in a reasoned manner, and imposes a just sentence.
Actually, Mr. Chauvin, would you join Mr. Nelson at the lectern? Mr. Chauvin, this is your opportunity if you wish to give any input to the court. And so I turn it over to you and your attorney.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, due to some additional legal matters at hand, I'm not able to give a full formal statement at this time. But very briefly, though, I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that would be of interest. And I hope things will give you some peace of mind. Thank you.
And I'll note that I did read your comments in the pre-sentence investigation as well.
Thanks, Fred.
All right, we are going to take a 15-minute recess so that I can complete the sentencing order based on what I've heard today. And let's reconvene at 2:45. We're in recess.
The court is now in a brief break. You are watching the sentencing of Derek Chauvin with the newsroom of the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. We finally just heard from Derek Chauvin, his opportunity to speak. We didn't hear a lot, though. Let's go to my guests, Rhonda Colvin, Mary Bethel.
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning into this stream. We'll be keeping the stream open and coming back to the courtroom as soon as things resume. I'm going to play back the interview that Georgia Fort did with the prosecutor Blackwell following the murder trial of Derek Chauvin. Bear with us just a moment.
I'm here outside of the Hennepin County government
That the force that Mr. Chauvin was using was lethal force.
Attorney Jerry Blackwell was one of the lead prosecutors who helped convict Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd.
Always had this kind of overarching concern that we could lose because we're trying to convict a police officer.
Blackwell says that's not the only reason he had doubts. Was it hard for you?
It was hard in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways. I mean, I never had a criminal case in my life. So the idea that I wouldn't just be in a criminal case, but it's a case that's the most watched trial in the history of planet Earth.
3 weeks into the trial, another man is killed by police. What went through your mind when you heard about Daunte Wright?
There's still much work yet to do. I understand the Daunte Wright case is a completely different case, but there's no question in my mind that once we received a verdict in the Chauvin trial, it would not be the end of the issues or challenges with either policing or race in America.
The Daunte Wright case was recently reassigned to Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who originally appointed Blackwell for the Chauvin trial, leaving many wondering if the two would be working together again to pursue justice for Daunte Wright.
I'm not as currently involved in the Daunte Wright case. And
if you are asked to be, would you help prosecute in that case too?
I don't know. I would have to wait and to hear. Obviously, I took on, was involved in the Chauvin trial on a pro bono basis, and I would presume that would be the basis that I might, if involved in Daunte Wright, it would be the same. And you kind of reach a point where you're pro bono to the point you're out of business. So I've got to stay in business before I can do pro bono for the public good. I need to first do what I need to for my own good first. And I've taken a year off already. I haven't discussed it with him. I haven't been asked by the Attorney General to be involved. So I don't know, but I don't have any plans right now to be involved in the Daunte Wright case.
The Derek Chauvin trial is just one case, and there's a bigger issue here. How do we solve it? Where do we go from here?
At the end of the day, the only lasting transformation in this country is only going to occur when people's hearts have changed. That if people can manage to reform themselves, they'll reform thousands. In the meantime, I think this sort of mountain of racial division and prejudice and hatred, if America created it, and America did, America can undo it.
Watch the full interview and get access to more exclusive content by becoming a monthly supporter at georgiaford.com.
That the force that Mr. Chauvin
Hi, welcome.
This is Jonathan McCullen, the
President of the Minnesota Justice Coalition.
Hi, thank you for coming. Hi. Tisha Gillen with Families That Want
Good to see you. We
Families.
talked before.
Yes,
Nice to see you. Thanks
we
for
wanted to
coming
be
today.
treated like human beings and not just leave it at the door. We worked really hard.
I know, no, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were out here. I just ran over as soon as I heard you get your high on text.
DJ organized with TCC for sure.
Thanks for being here.
Zainab, I'm the advocacy manager for Cameron.
Thanks for being here today. Were you having a hi? I'm Teddy.
Significant other of George Floyd.
Oh, hi. Nice to meet you. I saw. Were you over in the rotunda earlier? That's correct. Great. We were coming out.
Since the interview with Attorney Blackwell, the prosecutor in the trial, ended, we're going to show a clip that Georgia Fort covered showing the delivery of 65,000 signatures in favor of reform as a result of George Floyd's murder. This is the petitions being delivered to the governor's office.
The governor needs to use these as leverage. Of course, we know that we've had over 100,000 emails come to the legislature, various legislatures.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and people want this to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
It must happen. And all this budget stuff is fine and good. And we do need a budget, no question about it, but we need to have the governor use his political capital to make this happen.
And he said that he's willing to do so, and I'm hopeful we'll be able to get something done. How many did you say you brought?
65,000
That's incredible.
signatures. Put this on top of there so it's clear what that is. Thank you.
Well, thank you for bringing that. I'll make sure that they get to the governor, and hopefully that we can use that as another reason why this is urgent. We need to get it done in Minnesota from across the state.
It's unimaginable to me that Moreland or in Paul Gazelka could ignore, over 100,000 emails. It's like, come on, right? And now we've got 69,000 signatures. So I don't know what else it's going to take to get these guys to move their behinds, but they need to move their behinds. Now we've lost one of our protesters in the street last night. He was murdered by an angry man, an angry white supremacist man. And, I don't know what else it's going to take. Now we have a martyr for this movement, and I don't want martyrs in this movement.
Is the worst possible news to wake up to
Yes.
after some really hard weeks.
Yeah, most of us were up all night dealing with this. It's painful, and we're, and for the legislature to use our pain as like bargaining chips for tax cuts for rich people and all this is deeply offensive. It really is. And so that's why we felt like we had to be here to do this.
Thank you for making your voices heard and everything.
And I just want to say about 3 weeks ago, everybody was celebrating the 1 year age anniversary of George Floyd, but nothing has actually changed in the last year. Nothing has changed at the system level with laws, and nothing has changed in the police department. And we've seen Delon Ede, and we've seen Dante Wright, and we've seen Winston Smith. So we need actual change. And people go around and say that Black Lives Matter, but we need you to not just say that with your words, we need them to be said with your actions as well. And not just as a way to get Black people to vote for you, because that's completely unacceptable.
You're exactly right. More needs to be done, and actions.
I like Tim Watts. More needs to be done. I like Tim Watts.
And I'm really kind of bothered today that I showed up as a family to drop off this petition, and I stood outside the door, and the governor's office told myself and the rest of the community leaders, people that's been standing with our hurting families, to leave the box outside of the door. That's really hurtful, as well as the police walking through here right now, because they were clearly called, because they may felt like it was a disturbance. We're nothing but a hurting community. We're nothing but hurting families that wanted to drop off a petition to say, Tim Watts, please fight on our behalf.
I don't disagree with you at all. And I think, please know that after sort of an unusual year here with COVID, this is actually one of the first weeks where the office is opened back up to the public. As you know, unfortunately, the Capitol was closed for so long due to the pandemic. So we have a new crew, and we're developing some new processes to have the office open. So actually, I just heard that you were out front, just ran on myself to make sure I could say hi, introduce myself, and grab this and make sure it gets to the governor. So I apologize for that. Please don't read too much into it. I don't think anything like that was deliberate, but understood. I hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this by. I hear you too. We are going to do what we can to get this done, and this helps. Your work helps. Your voices help. I know that you're on the front lines of this issue, trying to help us move the ball forward, or let the House move the ball forward. So we'll see what we can get done here, and I'll make sure that this gets into our hands.
It feels like everything that you all have asked us to do, and all the meetings we have, get people to call in. Get people to sign petitions, get businesses at the table, do this, get that, do this. We have done everything you have asked us to do, everything.
The last thing that the governor said to us was get corporations involved, and we've gotten 80 corporations involved. On top of 65,000 signatures. That's not easy. That's work that's being done by families and organizers on the ground, and the least that can be done is make sure you fight for this issue the way we are, because that's not happening. Respectfully, we hold Gazelka and Warren Limmer accountable, but it is time that we hold Tim Walz accountable, because the Democrats are not doing the work and making sure that Black Lives Matter and justifying our issue, and instead of justifying the issues of what the standard of what the Republicans are fighting for is, it is unacceptable. The budget has to stop. You guys saying special session doesn't mean anything, because we heard it today from Representative John Thompson and all the other POC representatives saying that we had a special session, we had committees, and nothing was accomplished. And all of that is being done on our tax dollars. On top of us all working full-time jobs, we're still trying to make sure that we make change. And you guys run on policies and exploit Black people in the process. Nothing's been done. I wonder how many Black people are in Tim Wall's office, making sure that change happens. I wonder how many people of staff outside of Malcolm are actually Black.
Well, I hear a variety of things. It's like, what does it take? You know, like all this work.
I mean, how much,
what will it
it
take?
takes a lot of being respect dignity and seeing Black people as human beings, and that's not happening. The governor is seeing this issue as a Black issue. It's a human rights issue.
And we're tired of lip service. We want action. We need action. We have the House of Representatives, we have the governorship, and DFL control. There's no reason why we can't use and leverage our capital on them. Why are they controlling two different legs of the government instead of the other way around?
Hey, I don't know if you were caught up, but prior to Johnson White being murdered, this issue has been completely ignored. We would be here holding press conferences, asking for demands, begging for the governor to meet with us, and none of that was happening. Dante Wright was murdered, and there was all this interest in wanting to pass these bills, and now that the international media is gone, it's the same thing again. So how many more people have to be killed for this to take accountability? Or for the governor himself to take accountability?
And the framing of it has turned into like, oh, they're picking on the police. Nobody's picking on the police. In fact, when you allow police to continue to be unprofessional and to continue to engage in this conduct, they are picking on themselves. They have created this situation. And because they have created this situation, they are no longer credible on this situation. Their ideas about policies, their demands about policies are not credible, and they're not to be listened to any further because they have created this situation. You know, it would be like in the old days when doctors used to get away with murdering people all the time. And I've been a nurse for 40 years, so I know a little something about this. I knew doctors that did bad things that we had to get rid of. And in the old days, you know, doctors were like, we can police ourselves. No, you cannot police yourself. That's why we have accreditation agencies now to oversee this stuff, and licensing boards that have hopefully more strict standards. The other thing that comes up, and I've heard it time and again, is well, I do work with Post Board. I'm actually on the Post Board Rules Committee, and I'm also working with them on a model policy for police engagement with public assemblies. I do work with the Post Board. I've been going to Post Board meetings and sometimes standing up and yelling at those meetings for 8, 9, 10 years. And they only have so much power. The legislature has to pass the enabling legislation to allow them to make those rules. So telling us to take it over the Post Board is nonsense too. We need these changes. These are common sense changes. We aren't asking for anything crazy, radical, or undoable. Everything that we've asked for is completely doable. The will has to be there.
I hear you, and I don't work on our policy specifically, so I'm familiar with the group and the work and what's trying to be passed through the House and the Senate. You have a good point too. The House is DFL controlled, the governor's DFL. You know, why does the Senate have this much power? Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that's frustrating to us too. Be it on an issue like this that's in the forefront of the public debate, it's been going on for too long, it needs to be addressed, or be it the simplest thing in the world. Like, it's just unbelievable that it can be that hard to enact change. You don't need to hear that from me on the front line of this fight. It's maddening how long it can take to get anything done here. I hear you. I know there's frustration with the governor too. I can tell you he hears you. You are impressively loud in a good way, organized in a good way. You guys are out there moving the needle, keeping this issue in the press, keeping it in the governor's office. We hear you. We're going to fight to make some change here. This session is complicated. There's too many issues going on, so I get it when you're saying like whatever.
But I appreciate your recognition of what we've done and stuff like that, but it shouldn't take us to get 65,000 signatures. It shouldn't take us to get 80 corporations. If you actually truly care about Black Lives Matter, like so many Democrats say, like Tim Walz says, when he goes to these people's fucking funerals and pretends like he cares, but then he won't actually pass any legislation but then he'll actually pretend like he cares. We shouldn't take this. That's not what it should take. This is completely unacceptable.
You're 100% right that it should not take this.
These bills are supposed to be made out of paper, not human fucking bodies.
And it should be Tim Walz opening this door because he's the one that knocked on our door. It's not. We did not like to you like that.
No, understood totally.
But maybe someday, Jay, you never know. You might get
No,
look.
nobody
Depending on how you act today, you never know where your place might be. I'm just kidding.
So the key takeaway from this right here is action.
Yes.
We want action, action, action. Period.
The conversation is over.
The conversation
It's time for
action.
And people are getting angry. The most patient people are getting angry. So I know if that's happening. Look, if I'm getting angry, the state doesn't want that. I keep saying it. Like, we're done.
Exactly.
It's getting ridiculous at this point. Like, you can only be patient for so long. I'm gonna say that for little kids. Like, nah.
The white supremacists killed somebody last night for
Yep.
standing up for our loved ones. We're tired. We
Exhausted.
don't want to talk to anybody anymore. And if he's not going to do everything in his power to save somebody else's life, then just leave. Just go. Warren Lemmer, Paul Gazelka, all of them. We're sick of them. They don't care about people. And we're sick of them. They gotta go. If we gotta try to demote them, we don't want to wait to turn to vote them out anymore. We just want them to leave. That's it. We just want them gone. Get out of the seats. Warren Lemmer, Paul Gazelka, get out of the seats and just go. Because you don't care about the people.
I hear the emotion. And I
What do you feel?
Oh, yeah. And I it's hard because I don't want to go back. Thanks. I'll hold the box here.
What else is the governor right now?
I don't think the governor's in the Capitol right now. I know you've met with him before. I'd be happy to try to facilitate another meeting. But I know, I hear you.
What team are you on?
Sorry,
what team are you on? Because usually they assign teams. So
I'm sorry. I work in the governor's communications department.
So you're in communication.
Yeah, that's why we haven't met before. I'm sure you typically deal with like our outreach folks.
Yeah,
and
we
policy
need
folks.
to about accountability bills.
Absolutely. I don't disagree with what you're saying. Why our users on some of this, you're correct. And if this is not done, we're certainly
This
working
is
together.
day code.
Yes.
I'll tell you.
For this group, more than anyone, but for the whole state. I hear you on saying too, what can the governor do? You're blaming the legislature, this and that. Like if things aren't passed, then like we are gonna have to take a look at like what tools are in our toolkit of things we can do that don't require legislation. Right out of the gates, our human rights is launching an investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department. That's not enough.
The Department of Human Rights, we get that. That's all fine and dandy for long-term stuff. But we're trying to prevent the next Winston Smith, the next George Floyd, the next Dante Wright. We're trying to prevent that right now. So we need action now. That they can do their investigations, they can get all that stuff done in the future to come up with stuff, but we need action now. And we brought forth a package of bills and legislative initiatives that will do that.
If we did everything for it, we got a drop, we got a drop, we did everything, we got office without, we did everything. This is the thing we get, like, Melissa Workman, oh, you all need to work hard to get more Democrats elected. Why? The ones we have haven't done what they need to do, okay? So don't tell me, that's the part of the job of the DFL. They have a whole lot of money, they have a lot of people working for them. I do this as a volunteer, I've been doing it for 34 years, okay? I don't want to be told what else the hell I need to do because I'm doing everything.
No, y'all did your homework. He was a teacher. He knows he assigned homework. Now it's his job to do his work.
That's right. He has to take it from him. So we have more than done, but 65,000 signatures is is evidence. That's Minnesota signatures.
It's kind of incredible in a short period of time too.
Yeah.
Let me do my part and try to put a spotlight on this. Let me get this to great folks and our staff. I'm not sure everyone knows on these stuff. I'm sorry the governor's
That were submitted earlier and listen carefully to all the input here today. And it is truly appreciated that you took the time to stay with this case and to provide me with input. I have reviewed the pre-sentence investigation and carefully considered all the facts of the case and the law, but my comments are actually going to be very brief because most of it's going to be in writing. I have a 22-page memorandum that is going to be attached to the sentencing order. And why am I doing it in writing? To emphasize the fact that determining the appropriate sentence in any case, and in this case, is a legal analysis. It's applying the rule of law to the facts of an individual and specific case. And that is why, as opposed to trying to being profound here on the record, I prefer that you read the legal analysis that explains how I determined the sentence in this case. What the case is, or what the sentence is not based on, is emotion or sympathy. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge the deep and tremendous pain that all the families are feeling, especially the Floyd family. You have our sympathies. And I acknowledge and hear the pain that you are feeling. I acknowledge the pain not only of those in this courtroom, but the Floyd family who are outside this courtroom and other members of the community. It has been painful throughout Hennepin County, throughout the state of Minnesota, and even the country. But most importantly, we need to recognize the pain of the Floyd family. I'm not going to attempt to be profound or clever because it's not the appropriate time. I'm not basing my sentence also on public opinion. I'm not basing it on any attempt to send any messages. A trial court judge, the job of a trial court judge is to apply the law to specific facts and to deal with individual cases. And so, Mr. Chauvin, as to count one, based on the verdict of the jury, finding you guilty of unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony under Minnesota Statute 609.19 subdivision 2 paren 1, it is the judgment of the court that you now stand convicted of that offense. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute section 609.04, counts 2 and 3 will remain unadjudicated as they are lesser offenses of count 1. As sentenced for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. That's 270. That is a 10-year addition to the presumptive sentence of 150 months. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd. You're granted credit for 199 days already served. Pay the mandatory surcharge of $78 to be paid from prison wages. You're prohibited from possessing firearms, ammunition, or explosives for the remainder of your life. Provide a DNA sample as required by law. Register as a predatory offender as required by law. And then you will receive a copy of the order and also the attached memorandum explaining the court's analysis. Anything further from the state?
If this needs to be said, we just ask that it be executed forthwith.
Defendant is remanded to the custody of the sheriff to be transported back to the DOC or whichever custody is currently holding him. Anything for the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. We are adjourned.
Derek Chauvin sentenced to 22 years in prison in the killing of George Floyd. That is above what would be a typical sentence for this crime, but the judge agreed with prosecutors that there were aggravating factors that added to the time. He said that Derek Chauvin gets credit for the 199 days already served, but he now faces this lengthy prison sentence of 22 years, not the 30 years that prosecutors had requested, but still longer than what would be typical. Mary Beth Albright, let's go to you for some legal context on this sentence.
And now we're going to a recorded segment Georgia Fort meant for or intended to be at the end of this hearing.
All right, so we just finished watching the sentencing of Derek Chauvin. Yes, I am in the courtroom. This is actually pre-recorded, but I wanted to get you guys to leave your thoughts about today's sentencing here in the comments below, and know that I will be live again a little bit later today, and I will be sharing my thoughts with you as well. Thank you so much for watching the sentencing of Derek Chauvin here.
So keep your eyes open for any additional coverage by Georgia. She'll be out depending on what happens with rallies and speeches and different events following the sentencing. She'll be going live on Facebook, and so you can keep your eyes open on her channel. We'll also share her coverage on the Like It or Not and Benjamin Dixon Show Facebook channels. Possibly on YouTube as well, if possible. So if there are speeches and rallies, which are expected to some extent, we'll bring that to you when Georgia is live. Thanks for tuning in.